I'm presenting the idea today of a bank for Cornwall, and the reason for that is we're all very cross with the banks because they have been full of corruption and greed, and that is the reason we're in these times of austerity, because government chose to bail them out. They didn't have to do that, but they chose to do that. So I think if we have a locally owned bank which could start with resources which the council has, because they have a budget every year of over £1 billion, so they have a fair bit of resources available, with a much higher fractional reserve, so they don't lend 97% of what they've got, they only lend 80%, say. That would restore some of the issues, and also it would give local control and much better independence of thinking by creating our own money locally.
Quakers around the country are seeing the massive inequalities that we can see on the high street everywhere we look. We can see by the increase in the use of food banks and many other examples. And then we also hear this narrative about the fact, well, this is how the economy works, we need to make cuts because we need to get the system back up and running. And we're really keen to say, well, actually, the economic system we have is based on an ideology, it's not a fact. And that ideology is based on a certain set of values, and those values are not the ones that align with our values. And for Quakers, we have a really strong set of principles which drive what we do in the world. And one of those is equality, as well as peace and simplicity, sustainability, care for the earth, integrity. And we think it's incredibly important that people start talking about this values-based approach to not just economics, but to everything, really. And we put back in that human element into these conversations. And as a result, we think economics isn't really about economists, it's about all of us talking about what we want and why we want it. Because economy shouldn't just be there to serve itself, it should be there to serve human needs, and human needs are about human flourishing, and human flourishing, we come back to these values about the right for everyone to have access to a healthy life and an adequate income to feed themselves, etc.
Most of REN's power actually comes from roof-mounted photovoltaics, so PVs. But also involvement with wind as well, and wind at a reasonable scale. So some of it is the sort of standard farm scale turbines, but certainly we have aspirations for larger scale wind, simply because in terms of the output per turbine, you have a step change in the amount that actually comes out. So one or two large turbines would provide enough power to drive the whole of a small market town. You don't need a field of 30, you just need 2. So those things are key, but also actually biomass in terms of the heating element has been a major part of REN's activity, and that has been essentially facilitating installations through the renewable heat incentive, so that individuals can set up biomass boilers and then heat their homes through biomass. And one of the reasons that's key in Cornwall is that the nature of the terrain means that the gas grid is rather limited. And we do have gas to about a third of Wadebridge, but that's not true for many other places, and certainly not for outlying areas. So then heat through renewables through biomass is a good way to go. So that's the sort of mix we're looking at.
Convening conversations, I think, is a really powerful way to get the message out, because then everybody who comes to that conversation takes the message back to their own environment. So days like today, where people are coming from all sorts of different directions, different sectors, to talk together, I think are very powerful. And in the community chartering work that I do, the community conversations are absolutely central to thinking about what kind of long-term sustainable economy do we want, and how do we really support our ecologies to flourish at the same time. I work in schools. I head up Education for Transition Network. I have been getting my message out in a number of ways. So I've been creating programs for schools and also for young adults, so that obviously if you can get into a school which is a system, or a community that acts as a system, you have a real possibility of helping this message of change get across to 1,000+ people in one go. But of course that means thinking, how do I influence this system? Like, what are the leverage points in the system? What different messages would each leverage point need to hear? So a lot of the work we do with schools, or have been doing up till now, is thinking about how can teams of pupils and teachers think of their schools as systems and how to influence each part of the system. So we send them away with action plans as to how they can do that. My interest is very much about systems change. So my personal interest is going more towards bi-regional working. That means kind of pulling together a lot of different services, if you like, that happen in a place, in a geographical entity like food, water, waste, energy. And to think about systemically, how can we begin to connect all those things up? Because once you start to kind of send your message out through the system, you hope that it's going to reach all sorts of places you could have never imagined on your own it would reach.
So if you're talking about finance in Britain, it's just how bad and ramshackle the thing is. I mean, this is why the crisis and the collapse of 2008 happened. And the important point there, of course, is that 6 years down the line, at vast expense, I mean, the cost of the bailouts here to keep the entire show on the road, the IMF say it's about £1.2 trillion that we have to pay to kind of keep the banks doing more or less exactly what they were doing already, with a certain amount of griping about very, very minor changes they've been forced to do. And for as long as we have a financial system that operates like this, you get a financial system that's very good at doing things like producing mad speculative bubbles in housing. You know, I live in London. The situation of housing there, particularly if you're young, particularly, and certainly if you don't already own a house you have to rent, is becoming increasingly disastrous. It is provoking real, I think, unease, unrest almost. And that's something I expect to see develop over this year. So one of the things you'd want to do is say that instead of having this massive, internationally focused, profit-led financial system, we have really a very few very large banks who do kind of do the banking stuff we expect them to do, take money off us. You know, you have savings accounts, you make loans, they do all of that. But what they really want to do is go and gamble wildly on a big international financial market somewhere very distant from what most of us would want a bank to do and expect a bank to do. So one of the things you want to do is break those banks up as far as possible. Break them up, get them closer to local economies, to regional economies, get them back to a sense that they know what's happening in a region or a locality, that instead of, you know, a kind of computerized process where you go to the bank for a loan and they credit check you and all this sort of thing, well, let's get back to a situation where you might have a relationship with your bank manager, so he or she would understand that what you want to do as a small business who's looking to expand, for example. And that's something that just doesn't happen. Lending to small businesses has dropped and dropped and dropped every year since 2008.
Today's been about trying to start a conversation about economics, in the sense that economics is about all of us. It's about managing what we have rather than somebody else deciding what economic plan we should be working to. About encouraging people to think about, it's to do with the bread we buy, where we buy the bread from, it's to do with how we collaborate with the businesses, it's to do with making sure we consider things like inequality, food miles, land use. If we're not investing our time and money in Cornwall, I don't see why we should expect other people to, and there's a lot of push for that inward investment. So it has to be about us investing in our place for our people to make sure we don't leave anybody behind. And Transition.NES have been looking at their economy project for a while. We're one of a small group of areas that they've supported to deliver a transition economy day as part of a transition roadshow. So the event today was trying to bring people together in a room from all quarters, whether they be economic students or farmers or bread makers or graphic designers or artists or people involved in energy or food or money, to say how can we all contribute to a more resilient economy that we roll our sleeves up and get involved in, rather than thinking it's some sort of alien science that's got nothing to do with us. This afternoon is about trying to find a way of avoiding having to write a heavy-duty strategy document and actually using all the high-level energy which is buzzing around at the moment, having heard of lots of brilliant ideas from brilliant people. How do we draw that? What would we like to see happening if we were to draw a fantastic, resilient, prosperous future, which is about equality and fairness?
what would that look like as a blueprint? So we're actually drawing on a blue piece of paper with Keith Sparrow what a resilient Penwith might look like, what it might evolve in terms of people and energy and food and transport and housing and different financial structures and different movements around those and different connections between them. What would that look like as a picture? And then from that picture we can start to engage lots and lots of other people, because we all like to look at a picture of something. It makes a great deal more sense to our brains and are more likely to take in more complex information than with being given a 50-page strategy document. So that's the point of this afternoon, being ably facilitated by other colleagues from the Transition Network.